thank you for coming to the Mount Gretna School of Art lecture series, hosted here in the Hall of Philosophy in Pennsylvania's Hall of Philosophy, Pennsylvania Chautauqua's Hall of Philosophy. And I want to thank some of our sponsors for this lecture series this summer. I want to thank the Mount Gretna Arts Council for their support this summer, and specifically in relation to this lecture series, the Arts for All partnership of the Foundation for Enhancing Communities and Stinson Stroud. And it's my pleasure to introduce Todd Kelly, who I've known since college. He was a couple years ahead of me, and it sort of a model of seriousness and hard work and the love of reading philosophical art writings, because not every art student was into that. We did attend the studio school together and had to learn how to work. I think both of us shared that experience, or ways part of it a little bit at that point. But we both attended, Todd attended Anderson University for his BA and School of Visual Arts in New York City for his MFA. He shows regularly at Assia Kecksburg Gallery in New York, and there's a show up right now that he curated a group show, which is pretty interesting. I met one of those artists yesterday. So Todd, it's your turn.
So I want to talk about the title. Jay, I never had to have a title for my lecture, and Jay asked me for the title. And at that time, I was writing a grant that I had to show 20 years worth of work. So I was writing this essay explaining 20 years worth of work, and I had these images all laid out on the floor that looked like I was going all over the place. And I was thinking about this story in the Bible that I had learned about Abraham, who was sent off to the promised land, but he wasn't told where he was going to go. So he was just messing over, walking around, because his whole family gathered up and was meant to go somewhere. And Jay and I both came from a church religious background, and so I just told Jay I was going to call it a journey to the promised land, and I knew he would think that was a silly title. I didn't think he was actually going to use a title, so that's why it's what it is. But to be honest, I can't really talk about the work that I make without talking about the church where I grew up. It was a very strict church, and we would go to the services 3 or 4 times a week. The things we wore, the things we ate, everything was dictated to us. And it was also presented as the truth. It was like a holiness church. And the way that they did things was the way to do things. There were other churches in our fellowship, and even those other groups of people did things wrong. We were the only group of 400 people in the whole world who were doing things correctly. And if I tell you that now, that's kind of funny and kind of silly, and you're like, yeah, of course that's perfectly right. But when you're born into that situation and you're raised in that, it's very hard to see the outside of that, to see the other side of that situation. So it took me till almost in my 20s to find my way out of that church. And I went to undergrad art school, as Jay said, at Anderson University. And this is the very first painting I made, self-motivated painting that I made, not for class or whatever. And I was trying to make these paintings that were very preachy about how we would organize things. We decide what we need and we organize things towards what we need. So if you want a religion and you need a purpose for life, then you sort of create that. And I was thinking about my journey outside of the church, how to find my way outside of that religion, and how that religion sort of created a context for those people to live in. But the painting was difficult for me to make. I didn't enjoy making it. I hung it in a show. No one really was interested in it. It's a very mediocre painting. And I realized I wasn't painting my voice, and I was still sort of interacting in the same way that I learned to interact in that church, where you have to preach your message to people, like tell people what they need to do. And so I had a big talk with the director of the school at that time, and he was like, maybe you need to focus more on what you want, what you need to do, and have your own voice and do your own search, and that might be more useful. So I went off on a journey trying to find my own things. And so this was sort of the middle of undergrad school. I started just finding things that I liked, things that were objects from my life, and started putting them together, making trips to Lowe's, buying things that were interesting to me. So when it's time to make a landscape painting, I was making things more like this. And I ended up getting a solo show before my graduate show, showing these various works that I made, stuff collected from my parents' house and from my house, my apartment. But the truth is that I felt like I was using my own voice because I was making something very different from everyone else in the school. But if you know art very well, you know these are very informed by Robert Rauschenberg, by Jessica Stockholder. There's a lot of other voices in this work that I was pulling in. So it felt to me like I was doing my own thing, but I was still using someone else's voice. I realized later I was starting to use someone else's voice to find my way. After undergrad school, I got accepted to SVA, which Jay told you about. I knew I had a studio that was about 5 foot square, very tiny. I wasn't going to make those amazing things that I could make in Indiana. So I just started cutting up those installations into small little bits, attaching those installation pieces to the wall and painting on them. And this is where I started painting things that look like sort of organic growth of a city plan or pathways, lakes and rivers, and looking at a map and sort of thinking about my voice. I had come from architecture school before going to art school, and thinking about how I was going to design my own place, find my own path, sort of just doing that in a very straightforward way. And moving from studio to studio, then these pieces would all come down, and when I would go to another space, I would put the pieces up in whatever way I wanted. So they wouldn't go up together in the same way, and I would create new pathways on them. Then my grad school work was sort of that idea condensed onto a canvas. So there would be the sort of city planning marks, pathway marks, and then try to create some sort of form and shape using those marks, some sort of sense of space from there. And eventually adding more marks to that, trying to create sort of a still life suggestion to that, and seeing how many marks I could create and still get it to look flat, like you're looking at a map, but then also maybe a sense of space like you were looking at objects. Just various examples of me doing that, trying to see how developed I could make the objects, still just making my tiny little dash marks or like city growth planning things. After grad school, I did a series of still life paintings, still using the map marks, in which I would do a still life, but I would look at the still life from 3 different angles: the top, side, front, all in one painting. So yeah, just still, my thought process was back at that church where they were telling me there's only one way to do things, and I was still making work that was subtly talking about there's more than one way to look at something, there's more than one way to approach something, and there's more than one path to take. Right about that time, I had a major life switch, and I moved to London, and I basically packed everything up in my New York studio, put it in storage, moved to London with just one suitcase of paintbrushes and paints, and started over with empty white walls. And I decided I would just drop the whole landscape map making thing, or the still life landscaping thing, and I was going to be a landscape painter. And so I just tried to create some sort of sense of place, environment. And then, like in this one, for instance, I just thought about how many ways I could represent or signify a tree. And just started building on that idea. And this is where I started collaging images in the bottom right hand. Then you can see there's an image from an interior design magazine. And so I would use images from real estate magazines or interior design magazines. And I was really thinking about sense of place, me finding a sense of place. Like this was in about 5 years, I moved from Indiana to New York, sold everything, moved from Indiana to New York, and now I had just moved from New York to London, sort of sold everything. I'd started over again a couple of times, and so I was thinking about not only trying to find my own voice, but finding my own place, like where I belong. And that turned into this series of still lifes. I called them sous-bois, after the painting that Cézanne had made called sous-bois, which basically means like the undergrowth of the forest. And I just used the formal qualities of that painting that he had made. And I just tried to create a sort of catalog of all the all the marks that I could make, that I had made in the past. So there's collage in there, there's these little dash marks, there's taped outlines, there's spray paint, there's bits of string glued into it, but still trying to get that sense maybe of space or a sense of formal qualities that Cézanne had in the sous-bois painting. And developed those using a variety of different materials and collage things. I felt like I was starting to come up with something that might be my own voice in these paintings. And right about that time, I had another big life switch and moved back to New York. So this is the 3rd time that I sort of sold everything, moved back to New York and started over again. and was really thinking about who I was and my voice and who I could be and what I was making. And I just sort of in a moment of frustration on this canvas spray painted Todd effing Kelly across the front of it. And I was still making those other landscape pieces sort of on the side of this, but this developed into rather than making a painting that was just a catalog of my mark making, I was thinking of a variety of kinds of paintings I could make. So I made whatever painting I wanted at any given time, but I just put my name into it or insisted what I was. I'm Todd Kelly Painter is what it says. So the entire background of this painting is collaged images from real estate magazines, various houses. And then on top of that is the dash marks that I was making from the map drawings. And sort of creates a sort of gradient of it. Spray painted some yellow on it, and then I actually painted onto plastic backwards. I'm Todd Kelly Painter, and then pressed it on there. So I was actually making a print when I was insisting that I was a painter. And there's other things I did with my initials, creating a logo with my initials, and then making these paintings that have my signature. These are variants of all the different sort of collages and mark makings that I was doing at that time. The signature series, sort of the part that I'm leaving out is that I was trying to always get these shown, get people to see them. The signature series sort of garnered some interest among teeny galleries across Brooklyn. And I showed the signature series in a tiny gallery called Camel Art Space in Brooklyn, which is basically like a wide hall space in someone's studio building. And I always tell this story because I feel like people think, well, I'm not going to show my paintings in that shitty gallery because it's just a wide hallway in someone's studio building. But it was in that show that Ossie Geisberg came to look at it. She ended up buying 2 pieces and then called to represent me 2 months later from that tiny little show in a hallway gallery. So I did another signature series show with her, and then set about developing the next series of paintings that would sort of be my first major solo show with her. And for this show, I started what I called the Rebus series. And I basically kept doing the same thing that I was doing where I wanted to make whatever painting I wanted at any given time, but I dropped the name from it. So what I would do is I stretched up probably 50 or 60 24-inch by 18-inch canvases all at once. And every day I would go into the studio, I would just start a new painting, whatever, sort of reflecting whatever my mood or my thought process was for that day. And it might take me longer to finish that painting. I would work on it for weeks or months or whatever, but every day something new would get started. So that would be reflective of what I was thinking or what I was feeling at that time. And I worked on this series for several years and was able to, I think I made close to 200 paintings of this series. This first show that I did with Asya, we just hung in a perimeter around the gallery. She said, I think I could do about 20 paintings in this show. And so I boxed up 40 paintings and sent them to her. And then it was kind of up to her to pick out what she wanted to show and arrange them. And I came in and sort of, we had a discussion about how to arrange them. But I liked the idea that I was making this wide variety of things, sending them to her in bulk, and she could choose things, arrange them, and it would still be a show about me and my work. It would still be my voice that was being represented. So in a small, subtle way, I was making work that was my work, and I was still talking back about this way that I've been raised, that it had been instilled in me so hard to that there was one way to do things, and to be a good person, you needed to follow these rules. And I was trying to be a good person and have an incredibly unique voice, but then it could be presented in a variety of different ways, and it would still be my voice. So we were able to get a lot of mileage out of this series. We showed it in several fairs, and it was in several fairs, group shows, and a couple solo shows, one in Spokane, Washington. And then I finally felt like I sort of reached the peak of what I could do with that series. And I thought about if there was a way I could simplify that idea. So I made a list of there was about maybe 15 general ideas or thoughts or things that had been very influential to me. And I made these little emoji shapes that would represent each of those 15 things. And I would just make a painting sort of arranging those shapes. And then make 4 of that same color so you could arrange the shapes differently. We made different series of those, just arranging the emoji, representative emoji shapes. And then trying to bring that down even simpler, I just took some canvases and started drawing horizontal and vertical lines so it was a grid. Chose 4 colors and painted it over, filled it in over 4 times, and you get a just slightly different variation of what you're doing. So it's still talking about variety, still talking about being able to see something differently, but using the same kind of very rigid grid, very same colors over and over. I don't have all 4 images of this color, but just another color scheme of the grid. And while I was making all these various series of 4 paintings, it occurred to me that they were creating their own sort of narrative between the groups of 4. And I created this character called the Jolly Liar that I thought would be interesting to create. The idea of a person who would make up a narrative, you give them a set of facts or a set of particulars, and they can create whatever narrative they wanted. It could be different each time, but it would still have some element of truth and some element of creativity to it. It's like had a studio visit with Asya. There was all this like crazy different things going on at the same time as these Jolly Liar characters. And it was her suggestion to see if maybe we could make a show out of that. So we called it the Jolly Liar Show. And what I did is on each wall, I would hang one of the Jolly Liar paintings, and I would hang one piece from each of those sets of 4 on each wall. And so each wall of the gallery kind of was like its own miniature show. So it was sort of like this, back to the same idea of having a multitude of things you could do, but arrange them slightly differently to still have the same voice in each one. So there's various kinds of like abstract still lifes and the emoji paintings I showed you, the Jolly Liars. And then you see up at the top, there's these face paintings. It became sort of important to me as just a random thing I was drawing in my sketchbook one day, saying if I draw a still life, but I look at it from above. And I did various versions of that, and I drew a lemon cut in half with the knife that had sliced it, and it just looked like a face. And I kind of liked that. I've been focused for so long on saying, oh, you have to arrange things differently to see it differently. Sometimes there was just serendipity where you leave something, come back and look at it, and you see it differently. So I'd drawn something, it was meant to be a still life from above, and I came back to it, and all of a sudden it was goofy face. So I just, I did about 10 of these. I just stretched up some canvas and with an airbrush and some really thin paint, I made like 10 of them in one day. After the show, I kept making the Jolly Liar paintings to see if I could solidify the idea a little bit. So this is Jolly Liar Stargazer, kind of a guy who's looking at the stars, trying to connect his own truth from looking at the what's going on up in the heavens. This is Jolly Liar Tea Party. It's sort of like you gather with your friends and you sort of feed each other stories and add your bit to it and make the story better or worse. Jolly Liar Lemon Slicer. So even when you're on your own, you can stimulate interesting ideas from the facts that you have at hand. And at the same time, I sort of started dabbling in ceramics. So I started building these slab-built ceramic pieces, which I would build one of those like rectangular shapes, and then I'd create a plastic wrapped styrofoam armature around it. But then I could build another shape moving out whatever direction and turn it whichever way. So it wasn't being built with a top or a bottom or a side to it. I was turning it always every which way while I was building it. And the idea was that I would send it to the gallery or the collector would buy it and they'd pull it out of the box and they'd have no idea which way to set it. Like it could go any way that they wanted. And if I showed them, I could show them in various ways. So it's just another sort of simple way of trying to talk about that idea of having a variety of ways to present one idea. And I put a show together of those grid paintings and new Jolly Liars and these ceramic pieces called Uncertain Structure. And I like the idea of trying to have the sort of formal qualities of the paintings talk to each other across the room. Like these 3 very different objects, very different artworks, sort of creating some sort of narrative between them. And I call that uncertain structure because I liked the idea that I didn't think of each, in this show, I didn't think of each object as the work of art, but the room that you would be in the middle of the conversation amongst the things would be the artwork. So from that, I started developing the work that I'm doing right now. I decided I wanted to try to make that situation in each painting, where you would have all this different work that I'd made in the past talk to each other, but then have this sort of space in the middle where this conversation could happen. So I made these color photocopies of all of my past work and just started chopping them into bits and then made that collage perimeter around the painting, around the edge and the frame. And then we just create the grid pattern in the middle, sort of representing this space where the conversation amongst all that work could happen. These are like 14 inches by 11 inches, sort of just trying to work my way to the idea of developing the sense of how I could make them. And then started adding little foil bits and various things. So it was all of the past work, and then it started developing into adding new things into it, so the work was fresh. And at this time, I also started the process of photographing the work as it was in progress. So I would do 1 or 2 steps, take a picture of it, and then I would start adding that photograph, the process photograph, back into the piece, sort of layering the process of making it, and also working in groups of 4 again. There's another group of 4. You said I worked with Todd. I think Kelly came from about 15 years earlier back into this piece. I'm starting to add things, more sculptural elements like the extruded plexiglass and things like that. Also cutting holes in the canvas to pierce the surface, sort of talk about it as an object. And this is work that I made during quarantine, where you're stuck in your house and you're going through all your closets and your drawers and you're finding all that junk that you packed away and said, I'll take care of that someday. Well, I started taking care of it, pulling it out. So there's embedded in the background is an old running t-shirt. There's a paint stick in there. There's some rocks from the driveway of the house where I was staying, real estate magazine images, pictures of my past paintings, pictures of this painting in progress, and then this sort of grid, which I started thinking about as like this picnic blanket where you could sit out and you would have all these things gathered around you and have a conversation about what was going on the piece. Same idea here. I started, you can see this sort of pink, this pink pattern right here is basically pictures of this whole painting and process, just sort of photoshopped to create a pattern. I just added that bit. And then I would also do this thing where I feel like I've added too much stuff. I would just start editing out. But instead of pretending that I didn't put something there, I would just leave the editing mark. The great editing mark bit has another element. This one has like an old watch that I had when I lived in London, random socks that don't match anymore. My first mask that I wore during quarantine on the train. And this one became sort of more autobiographical. There's kind of a goofy cartoon silhouette of me in the background. There's the Jolly Liar paintings. There's the paint works of this painting, photographed and processed, sort of turned into a pattern. There's blip catalog pages here. The little toy fox glued to the top. A male fox is called a Todd. There's a little ceramic figurine of a painter. And then behind the screen is a photocopy of the last self-portrait that Picasso ever made, like a day before he passed away. So it's this very sort of midlife crisis-y painting, sort of me thinking about myself becoming an old painter. This painting has images from Art Forum magazine, images of the painting in progress. This is one of the first ones where, for a long time, I've been attaching objects, and I'd use a glue that I wanted those objects to stay on there. And when I decided I needed to edit, the only way to get the object back off of it would be to actually cut the canvas. And that's where the idea of the hole in the canvas came in. And this was the first piece that I made that I felt like I needed something in this space rather than attach something. The element that I added was actually a hole. So I started using the hole as my another element of work. Another piece of running t-shirts, vacation photos, gay pride, beads, stickers, pieces of the painting, photos of the painting in progress. This one is one of my favorites. It has this. I found this old camera from when I lived in London. When I moved back to New York, I lost the cord that connects to the laptop to help me get the pictures off of it. And I always thought that all these years someone would somewhere figure out how to get those pictures off for me, and I just never did. And so I decided I would just, because I've been starting to put pictures of myself into the paintings anyway, that I would just add whatever thousands of pictures were on this digital camera are now part of this painting forever. I just glued it down and painted over the whole thing. And these are all sort of objects that were important to me right before quarantine hit. These stories are all in here for me, but I think anyone coming to it doesn't need to know the story. You can kind of feel the sense of objectness and the sense of conversation that can happen between the objects that are happening on the feed. I showed all these pieces in January. I asked you guys for gallery. It was kind of this, because what this is representing is that basically my dealer sprung the money to video the show in 3D, and it now lives forever. So I agreed to have a show during quarantine where anyone who came to see the show had to make an appointment. They had to mask up. There could only be 2 or 3 people in there at a time. But because I did that, she agreed to video it in 3D. So you can go to my website or her website, and you could still walk through that show even now. You could zoom in on the paintings, and she doesn't put that money up for anyone else. So this show, even though a lot of people didn't get to see it in real life, it's living forever. And I kind of like the fact that it exists online now. And now I'm up to where I'm at in my studio right now. This is how I'm currently working. I'll lay out four canvases at once. I go through my phone and my laptop and pull images that I'm interested in working with. So they're images of my past paintings and just various images that I've stored or collected. And the thing about working in groups of 4 is that if I just made one painting and I thought maybe I want to put a picture of a bathtub in it, I would sort of hold myself back thinking, okay, this is a little goofy. Maybe I should make a painting with a bathtub from Architectural Digest in it. But if you do it 4 times over again right away, you create this context for yourself. Sort of any goofy idea that comes into your head, you can kind of say, yeah, I could do that because I've done it over 4 times now and created this new context. So anyway, I lay out some sort of composition with the images that I've chosen to work with, secure them, and then I have these various house paints mixed up already. I'll do the background, draw out a grid, then fill in the grid with some sort of gradient pattern, sometimes leading the background. And this is where these are at right now, but from here I'll usually photograph the piece, photograph each one as it is, and then add that image back into the painting, and they'll take off kind of on their own. So that final pieces won't look like they're such a set, where they kind of live on their own. And these are kind of how they're turning out. I had a bunch of these up in my studio when someone recently very close to me came into the studio to look at them and said, you're basically making scrapbook paintings. So they're basically scrapbooks. And at first it was like a big, I had a picture of my mom making scrapbooks. We're just taking every image that she could find and sort of heightening every moment of our life. But when I thought about it, I realized that actually is what I'm doing. And I like that process of using images, using painting, using all the different things that are in my periphery that I'm capable of using and creating an image with it. So there's layering of things that you can't tell at a certain point, which is actually painted and which is actually photographed, what's actual objects. And I've had a lot of fun making these pieces. Now, so none of these have been shown yet. These are all things that are still in my studio. This one, you could say I started the whole painting. There's like ads from Art Forum magazine across the background. Then it's sort of whited out. I paint this colored grid over the whole thing, photograph that, add the images of it here and there. There's images of Fashion magazine on top of that. And then an image of the whole painting at that point, then up in the top corner. Then there's 2 photos of my work table where I'm cutting the papers. Pile of extruded plexiglass sort of glued up to the top right corner that kind of feels like it's formally connecting to the rest of the paper. And this one, using images from real estate and home decorating magazines. There's a hole in the middle of the piece that's covered with purple plexiglass. And I'm trying to, with these, move forward quickly, and I've got about 40 of them started all at once, just moving forward. And when I get stuck, I just start 4 more. And I'm just trying to move forward without trying to think too much about what each object or what each thing means. The whole background is made up of like a tiling of another painting that's been finished. And then the photograph of me in front of the Frank Gehry house in Venice Beach, California. And then if we could play this video. So they're now the newest ones that I'm making. I started painting actually on the back of the piece as well, and adding bits to it. So basically I'm making sculptures where I'm just really paying attention closely to the surface of the piece. So this is still in progress. This is another one that's in progress. Sort of thinking about both sides of the piece at once and how you work around the painting from side to side. And then the last one. This is the one I would think is probably finished at this point. I'm using the holes, using extruded plexiglass, various objects that I find, and lots of canvases, letting them sort of stand up on their own. I'm not sure where these are going or how big they're going to get or what's going to happen with them, but this is where I'm at right now in my studio. Did I stay within my time limit? All right.
Thanks, Todd. And I would just real quick, I meant to mention this earlier, that in about 2009, I jumped at the chance to teach a seminar discussion class on pluralism in contemporary art, just the variety of contemporary art out there. And, obviously it's going to be like theory-driven and contemporary art canon-driven, but I also wanted it to be even more so about what artists were actually doing, which wasn't always in the books ever or yet, but a little better now. And so I did reach out to Todd as somebody that I knew from New York who just loved it and loved going around to artist shows and visiting studios. And he really helped me think through that seminar class. And he was able to talk about artists with insight that, I didn't have. I had a pretty clear window into a certain world of contemporary art. So he's been here meeting with the students on Fridays for a seminar discussion class over Zoom. So this is a special week for him to be here for 2 or 3 days and meet the students. He's been engaging in conversation and art readings and writings. So I'm looking forward to this question and answer period.
So you talked a little bit about building permission for yourself through context, or just building kind of a backdrop and allowing yourself that. Have you found anything that's come up that you weren't able to permit yourself, or it was too, have you self-censored at all, or has that always worked by building a body of paintings that incorporated the same element?
Yeah, there are things that I've tried to incorporate in the paintings that I feel became difficult for me because there was such a personal element to it. So it's not even just about being daring enough to do it. I've even repeating it over 4 times. I feel like certain images or things that related to certain people that were very hard for me to work with. And I feel like it's sort of something that I would have to come around to at a later point. But I like the idea that I know that there's a challenge out there with something that I haven't been able to incorporate yet, that I'm still going to sort of inch forward. Also, when I was doing the Jolly Liar thing, I had a point where I ran out of money for a while, and so I made Jolly Liar t-shirts and Sliced Lemon t-shirts. And I have these one-offs of things that I was testing. This is a Sliced Lemon face one. So if you ask a question, you get a t-shirt.
I have a really basic material question, which is I've never heard of using extruded plexiglass. Can you just talk a little bit of super basic?
I don't know how they make it. I mean, it's just, that's what they call it. That's how they call it.
Why is it called extruded?
I think they just pull it through, just like you would if you extruded clay or something.
Okay.
It's pulled through a very small thing, so it's like this long stretched out
Got it.
piece. I think it just makes it stronger by having it.
I just wanted to say I appreciate the you showing your images. I really enjoyed it, and especially the connection between Jessica Stockholder work early in Indiana, actually coming back, to what you're doing now. I think there's a lot of connection there. But I'm curious to know how you think about the marketplace and selling your work, and how does that influence what you make?
I don't want it to influence what I make. I mean, I feel like I want to make something that's very personal, like my voice. But I'm also I do have to buy groceries and pay bills and stuff, so I'm very influenced by what kind of money comes in. I feel like I've gotten lucky to find a dealer who's very interested in my work. Sorry. A dealer who's very interested in my work and is very supportive, and she stuck with me. It was 2011 when she started representing me. She stuck with me, and there's been periods where she's not shown me anything that I've done for 2, maybe 3 years, because I've just been in a dry period where I've not been able to make anything. She knew she couldn't move, but she's been willing to stick with me and just know that I was going to push through that. So I appreciate that she's been able to do that for me. But there have been, like, to be honest, there have been periods of depression where I sort of have a whole summer to paint, but I sit and cry every morning because I don't know what to do next, or what direction to move forward next. The whole life circumstances, like there's no money to make the work, there's no money coming in. You kind of have to. I'm showing you all the highlights here. There's like a lot of gifts and with the rising in that as well.
Because you're going over a lot of time.
It's not consistent. It's there have been periods where I journal a lot, or other times where it's just sort of in the studio working it out. I've also had periods where I just feel like not looking at art at all, and I'll move towards novels and just read all those various things, trying to keep the ideas moving. And it's not. If I'm telling you about this idea and then I stop and then this idea, it's actually like 3 ideas at once, and one sort of like takes over and sort of like more accordion style. Like there's one that kind of just becomes more important to me, the others drop off, and then they sort of circle back around and come in. But I feel like my practice in the studio is I'm never just doing this painting and this idea. There's like something else over here on the side, and there's this other thing, and there's something there with a photo. So if something is starting to dribble off a little bit, I just move over to the other thing. Does that answer your question, though?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So a couple of lectures ago with Mark Lewis, we were talking about how like all of his moves influence his art in different ways, and you keep talking about like all these very significant like changes, like going to London and to New York, and how has that like influenced your work? And, like, how do you work through those giant changes?
Yeah, those moves were very difficult, and I feel like when I said, oh, I moved from New York to London, and I just decided, oh, I'm going to be a landscape painter. It wasn't like a silly decision. It was kind of you move to a new space, you have nothing, you're looking at 4 white walls, and it's like there's a sense of possibility, but there's this overwhelming sense of like what could I do, what can I do? And I feel like they were huge decisions to make, but also very exciting. And I feel like they influenced my work in just opening up possibilities each time. Like I don't know that my work took on a London flavor or looks New York or looks Indiana or nothing about the specific location, but it was the move itself and me thinking about who I am. Who am I consistently from Indiana to New York to London and back to New York? The move doesn't affect me, but it was hard in that moment to know how it was going to work.
I'm wondering if you could put into words, maybe compare the breaking through the fear of, you were saying about how you were told how to do things in your religion, but also I feel like the art world and the art market tells us how to do things. So I don't know if you can put into words, like comparing that breaking through the fear of both of those things.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about those two things at once. They're very similar. And I feel like when you talk about the art market, there's things that are that you do in a painting that people are like, it's not going to sell. Like when you start attaching a ceramic piece to the front of it, or cutting holes in the painting. And I feel like making those moves actually is what gets me through the fear. And I think it was the same with the church situation, is that as I realized that I was actually a gay person, like I couldn't just hum along in that church anymore. There was a point where I had to be like, look everyone, you either have to take me or I have to be you. Like there had to be something that forces that, and then you work through that. So I feel like I think in the paintings, when I'm willing to like start attaching weird objects and doing weird things, it's that sense of like, I'm just gonna have to force this issue. I'm just gonna have to, I don't know if I should cut a hole in it. I'm gonna just have to cut a hole.
For your block backdrop, how do you create that? Do you use a roller or just a paintbrush to kind of get those block backdrop? Because it's really kind of orderly but not precise.
Yeah, it's hand drawn. I just draw a horizon line and a line down the middle straight, and I just with my hands sort of visualize I want the grid to be this size, and I just do it. So, and then I try to follow that basically with the paintbrush, so it sort of like follows the line of the hand. The grid will sort of like go uphill or downhill. Yeah, and then the gradient sort of comes from just looking at the images I've already attached, so sort of just get inspired by what I've attached to it. And it's either, it could be a solid grid or a gradient based on what's there, or just somehow being inspired by the objects.
In the beginning, you had a painting that had block lettering over the painting. I found that fascinating. How did you make that?
It was painted on plastic. So I have like this acetate plastic. I wrote on the plastic, "I'm Todd Kelly, painter," in permanent marker. Then I flipped it over and painted those lines. And then I just took the plastic and smushed it down onto the painting. It's just house paint, so you have to work pretty fast. Just brush it out as fast as you can and then smush it down and just make some paint.
You talked about Rauschenberg as being one of your like inspired artists, and I was wondering who more currently you're inspired by.
Right now, I have a group of people that I look at all the time. There's people I guess that I don't say they're my favorites, but I know that I come back to look at them all the time. One is Isa Genskin, a painter from Berlin. You'll see the obvious connection, I think. Still Jessica Stockholder, Joanne Greenbaum, a painter who I really like, and then Laura Owens is a big influence for me right now. And all of them, it's not for necessarily the formal qualities that they're doing, but their ability to move around in what they're doing. They sort of created a space for themselves where they have a lot of room to work. They can do all sorts of various things, and I really appreciate that, the work that they're doing in that way. Anytime I go to see a show of theirs, it's like something different and surprising, and I think that's what I like.
So we work on different skills and stuff, but I think you talk about costumes and stuff. There are like things you can do to help preserve that on canvas.
House paint?
Yeah.
Most my paintings get covered in layers and layers of acrylic gel, just from the collaging and from adding various things to it, and so much toxic glue to hold the objects down. I don't have any fear of anything ever coming off of it. I know that the way materials are made now, all of these paintings are going to outlive me and any future generations. So I just don't worry about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm really interested in kind of taking a canvas and almost making it and pulling it into the third dimension, taking it off the wall. And that's something that I've always been interested in doing with my art in the future. I was interested in knowing what are some of the challenges or obstacles that you face when, say, wanting to present your work at a gallery, or having people interested in maybe purchasing a piece of art or trying to understand it, and kind of confronted with the fact that it's not just on a wall today.
Those new pieces I showed you that are three-dimensional, I haven't had a chance to show yet. And my dealer hasn't even seen them yet. So that might be a question I could answer better next year. But I do feel like what happens is if you're making something that someone's interested in, it almost doesn't matter if the dealer or the collector is interested in it, it hardly even matters the difficulties surrounding it. If they're into what you're doing, they will be willing to put up the money to make sure that piece lasts, or they can display it where they want to. I've just never seen that My dealer shows people who make installations that have like gravel poured around and things, and she's able to sell some of these. I don't know who's buying that and where they're putting it, but like people are into that. So Julie Schenkelberg's work, and they will buy that work, and they find a place for that. And so I have a sense that, and the things that I see in the gallery is this style. I have a sense that if you're making something that's interesting to people, they'll find a home for it. But the other end of that is you're probably not going to sell as much. If you're selling little paintings that hang on the wall that are, in the $1,000 price range, you'll probably do really well and sell a lot. But if they have to stand on a table somewhere, or you have to keep watering it, or there's some sort of weird thing that has to go on, you just won't sell as many of them. I mean, you'll find people who will show that and people who will be interested, but if you need to make money off of it, that's a consideration.
Thank you, Todd.